Hi everyone, I'm Alice Merkel. I'm a collections assistant at the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory.
Hi, my name is Patricia Sanford and I'm the director at the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Lab. Today I'm at the end of the boardwalk at Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum, and we're right along the edge of the Stearns site, a 600-year-old Native American village site here at Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum.
What was life like for Maryland's native people 600 years ago? Without written records from Maryland's first people, it is necessary to rely on archaeological data to help us answer this question. In 1986 and in 1988, archaeologists worked at the Stearns site and were able to discover a number of interesting things about life here 600 years ago during a period archaeologists call the Late Woodland period, from 950 to 1600 AD. The site was named for Richard Stearns, an avocational archaeologist who first discovered the site in the 1930s while he was surveying the shore of the Patuxent River looking for pieces of prehistoric pottery and flake stone tools that would indicate the presence of pre-colonial contact people.
The site was first visible to Richard Stearns as a large shell midden, with midden being defined as areas used for the disposal of trash and other debris of daily life. Because oysters formed an important part of the diet of native peoples living in southern Maryland, oyster shells formed a large percentage of debris thrown into the midden. Stearns recorded the site as, quote, contains a shell deposit about 1 foot thick and about 3 acres in extent. This site turned out to be a large midden and village site occupied at the end of the late woodland period. It was suggested that this might be the location of the village Quomacac, observed by John Smith in 1608. Because no artifacts of European manufacture were found on the site, though, this appears not to be the case.
During the late woodland period, Maryland's native peoples began to live in settled villages, although there was still some seasonal movement. Late woodland sites were typically situated near large streams, often in areas with soil suitable for agriculture. Around 700 years ago, larger villages began to develop, with outlying smaller settlements. Some of these villages consisted of widely dispersed houses, while others were at least partially contained within palisades. The cultivation of corn, squash, and beans became widespread throughout this period, although wild games and plants were still extensively exploited. The most important technological innovation of this period was the introduction of the bow and arrow. The late woodland period ends when sustained contact between Indians and non-Indians begins.
Archaeologists found several storage pits at the site that had been filled with garbage from the village: food bone, broken pottery, stone tools, and oyster shell, for example. Nearly 12,000 pieces of animal bone were found at Stearns, representing the food that the residents there ate. Those food remains included beaver, wild turkey, squirrel, opossum, box turtle, crab, and a variety of fish, including striped bass, eel, and bluefish. There was also a large deer antler, which lets us know a couple of things. We know that people living at the Stearns site ate deer, but also that they used the bones and antlers to make tools. Bone at the site had also been shaped into awls, a pointed tool used to perforate leather for sewing into clothes or making foot coverings.
A number of carbonized or burned seeds were also found, providing clues to the diet of the inhabitants: blueberry, grape, acorn, hickory, corn, and beech. A number of stone tools were also recovered by the archaeologists. 3/4 grooved axe, made from greenstone, a basalt that was commonly used for axes because of the hardness of the stone. People often think axes like this were ceremonial, but they were functional tools and were used in felling trees. Groundstone axes have been found in archaeological contexts, dating as far back as 10,000 years ago in North America, but unless they are found in the datable soil layer of feature, like radiocarbon dating of a hearth for example, it is hard to date them. Just like hammers, once you find a good design, you don't change it much.
Projectile points are a class of pointed objects, most commonly made of bifacially flaked stone, that were attached to wood, bone, or cane and used as tools. Native Americans used projectile points to make sharp tips for thrusting lances, throwing spears, darts propelled by a handheld throwing stick called an atlatl, and arrows shot with a bow. Native Americans also made knives and drills using projectile points attached to wood or bone handles.
Archaeological findings showed that the residents of Stearns practiced agriculture, as seen in corn kernels, resided at the village at least 1 or 2 seasons of the year, spring, summer, and possibly early fall, long enough to raise and harvest crops. They also hunted, trapped, and fished the abundant wild resources that lived in southern Maryland, using meat for food, skins for clothing and blankets, and the bone for making tools and objects of ornamentation. Since there were no European-made artifacts on the site, we know that it had stopped being used before European contact.
This video on the Stearns site will conclude our Site Tour Saturday videos series. We hope that you've enjoyed learning about the 4 sites interpreted along our trails here at the park: Sukeek's Cabin site, the Smith St. Leonard site, Kings Reach, and Stearns. We hope that these videos will inspire you to visit the park and see these sites for yourself.